So today's preaching passage is from 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. And in my Bible it's entitled Hezekiah, King of Judah. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake that Moses had made, for up to that time the Israelites had been burning incense to it. It was called Nehushtan. Did you get all those names? And of course, English spellings of Hebrew names and my poor attempts at pronunciation probably leave it a long way from where it originated. We humans have a long history of going astray, right? Israel did it. They did it in the desert, as you may recall, and it lasted how long? 40 years, right? 40 years wandering in the desert, astray. And we do it all the time as people today. It's not a new problem. We find that when things are good, we find ourselves further from God, don't we? Because we really don't need Him right now. Things are fine. Life is good. Everything's going the way we want it to. And so we just almost imperceptibly, we are just stepping away, we get further. And then we wonder, why did God leave us? Yeah, that's how it usually comes out. We find that another time that we find ourselves far from God is when we're deceived. You might remember a story about Adam and Eve in the garden. They were deceived, weren't they? Yeah, they were lied to and they believed it. And because they believed it, they ended up far from God. That happens, unfortunately, in a lot of times in our society today, and sometimes it's even preachers who are doing the ones who are being deceptive and leading people away from God. There's a third time I thought of when I was thinking this whole thing through, that we tend to be separated more from God, and that's when we're afraid. You may have heard that fear is the opposite of what? Faith, right? Fear is the opposite of faith. And when we're afraid, we find ourselves further and further from God because our faith is smaller. You've all heard of Edgar Allan Poe, perhaps. Edgar Allan Poe was a famous American poet. In 40 years, he went from riches to rags. He was raised by foster parents who loved him a lot. He was educated in the best private schools. He was unparalleled as a literary critic an editor, a poet, an author. But when he was young, he lost his bride to tuberculosis. And after that happened, he began to battle alcohol and drug abuse, depression, and even insanity. He was found unconscious in a gutter on a Baltimore street, penniless, living on the street. And after he was found, he died 4 days later. His poetry lives on to this day. And personally, I find it very moving. Powerful words. And yet he ended up in the gutter. Sometimes we end up in what I would describe as a spiritual gutter, don't we? Yeah. Even if once we closely followed Christ, even if once we felt the divine close to us all the time, we could see the light, we enjoyed the favor of God, sometimes we end up, in spite of all of that, back in a place that is far from God, a spiritual gutter. Wesley had a word for this. He called it backsliding. Yeah, backsliding. Some of us are moving forward. Some of us are not moving. We just are satisfied with where we are. And some of us are actually backsliding. Not where we want to be. So there's 2 things I want to bring up today. One is that if we're going to grow spiritually, we have to begin by removing what's wrong. And that means dealing with the past. Hezekiah, he was the son of a wicked king. That wicked king's name was Ahaz. And everything you can think of that's wrong with society today was amplified during the reign of Ahaz. You see, sometimes we're led astray by leadership. And I'm going to get a little personal here because I'm thinking about the split that happened in my former church. It grieves my spirit that happened. Misguided leadership can be terrible for a congregation, can be terrible for a community, can be terrible for a country. It's polarizing. The sun was in your eyes. I know what happened. But I like the halo effect. It's beautiful. That's what happened at Grant. And I was just talking to Nancy about this morning. There is nothing in the Bible that says we have to agree with each other. No. In fact, I don't think God expects us to agree with each other. I think He knows that we're going to have different opinions on theology. We're going to have different opinions on social ideology. But that doesn't make us any less a church. And it doesn't make us any less a family. So here's all these people sitting in that church at Grant. They've never agreed with each other. Never. Now, they weren't divided by the center aisle, which I've actually seen in churches, but they didn't agree with each other. I would have conversations with people who were very progressive is the word we're using now. And others who were very traditional, that's the other word we're using now. They were just, in their theology, they were light years apart, you know? And yet they all worked, you know, for the Christmas bazaar. They all helped decorate the sanctuary. They all believed the words of the hymns that they sang. They participated in the choir and in the handbells and heard the sermons. They worshiped together. They were family. They had relationships. And along comes a leader who says, no, 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 no. In fact, the particular leader that led them astray said, I can't worship with people that I don't agree with. I can't worship with you unless you believe what I believe. That's what he said. But the truth is, they had been doing it for decades, and it was just fine until somebody came along and said, you need to choose sides. Are you with them or me? Does everybody understand that that's just not right, and it's not what God wants? There's a much higher ethic than your beliefs. And I'm convinced that it's relationships. I'm convinced. I'm convinced that God, when he was here in the form and person of Jesus, that he demonstrated to us that relationships are more important than beliefs. In fact, he was highly criticized for it, wasn't he? He ate with sinners. You know, when he was speaking to the woman at the well, he was breaking every social convention of the day. He was a Jew talking to a Samaritan. You don't do that. He was a man talking to a woman in public. You don't do that. You see why Jesus was always in trouble and why he was considered such a radical leader? He was showing us who we're supposed to be. Do you think he agreed with the woman at the well? No, he didn't. Do you think he agreed with the sinners at the table that he ate with? No, he didn't. But he wanted to be in relationship with all of them. And we need to be in relationship with each other, with people who have hurt us. That's why we talk about forgiveness all the time. With people whose lifestyles we don't agree with. With people who use coarse language or tell jokes that are off color. People we don't agree with. People whose actions we wouldn't emulate. We're supposed to be in relationship with them. And Jesus told us that when he said, love God and love your neighbor. And the Pharisees tried to call him on it, didn't they? Well, now, who's our neighbor? We're going to define who our neighbor is so that we can get out of this. You know, there's got to be some fine points here that we can make so that we can say, I like Steve as my neighbor, but Natalie ain't happening, you know? No, that's not what Jesus said. Everybody is your neighbor. Everybody. Everybody. We have an opportunity to overcome those things that have happened in the past, those things where we've made poor decisions, where we've followed misguided leaders. We have an opportunity to make new choices. Now, that's not obvious because we live in a world that now has a victim mentality. Here's what I mean by a victim mentality. It means that we are pretty certain that the choices were all taken away from us, okay? It's not my fault. I grew up in an abusive home. That's why all this happened. My parents beat me. That's why all this happened. It's never really our fault. The things that we do, we don't have a choice. We have to do them. And so because I was beaten by my parents, I beat my children. Do you know it doesn't have to be that way? It does not have to be that way. You do not have to make the same choices that your parents did. Look at Hezekiah. Hezekiah decided he was going to make a different choice. He grew up under this evil father. Every kind of debauchery you can imagine happened under Ahaz. And yet when Hezekiah became the leader, he decided to change everything, and he changed everything. He made completely opposite choices, and his first choice was to bring everybody back to God. We have the opportunity to make those same kinds of choices. It might be a little bit like the choice that this person made, but maybe not exactly. This letter to the IRS came. It said, "Gentlemen, enclosed you will find a check for $150. I cheated on my income tax return last year and have not been able to sleep ever since. If I still have trouble sleeping, I'll send you the rest. Sincerely, a taxpayer." We have the opportunity to make real choices that make a real difference. We don't have to live the life of a victim. We can do what Hezekiah did and completely change course. Hezekiah fully invested in restoring his people to God. He tore down the high places. In my title, I chose to call that the pedestals. What are the high places? They're the things that we make more important in our life than God. And I'm telling you, there are things that are so traditional and so much a part of our ethos as Americans that we can't even imagine that they're supposed to be subservient to God. We think it's more important to put our family first before God. That's not the way it's supposed to be. We put God first. We think we're supposed to put our country first before God. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Who are we supposed to put before God? What are we supposed to put before God? Nothing, nothing, nothing. God's first. He's the most important. Now, I personally do not believe that God is going to tell you to neglect your responsibilities with your family. If you put God first, your family will be stronger than if you put your family before God. That's what I believe. If you put God first, your country will be stronger. Imagine if everybody in the United States of America put God first. Do you think our country would be stronger? Yes, of course. You see the difference between putting our country first ahead of God and putting God first ahead of our country? Yeah, makes a difference. So, all these things are idols in our lives, and they come before God. And we do not honor God when we're honoring idols in our lives. The first one was remove what's wrong. So remove the high places. Hezekiah took the high places away. He broke them up. He eliminated altars to idols. He eliminated the serpent that they were worshiping instead of God. He took down the, what are they called? Asherah poles. In the announcement I sent out about this, there was a picture of an Asherah pole on there, which has nothing to do with God. And the second thing is restore what's right. Restore what's right. This is 2 Chronicles 29. Hezekiah purifies the temple. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. In the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests and the Levites, assembled them in the square on the east side, and said, "Listen to me, Levites, consecrate yourselves now, and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove all defilement from the sanctuary." It's not enough that we remove what's wrong, but we also have to restore what's right. Hezekiah knew that it wasn't enough to take away all the idols. He also had to purify the temple and make it a holy place again. There was years ago a report, one of the first exposés, if you will, of the beliefs of our future ministers. It occurred in Red Book magazine in August of 1961. The publishers hired one of the top pollsters in the nation to survey representatives of our seminaries, people who were going to school to become pastors at the time. And the interesting thing is, here's what they found. This is in 1961. That was a few years ago, like 60 years ago. 70? I don't even know. 60. 60 years ago. So, it says, of the pastors in training, 56% rejected the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. 56% of pastors that were being trained in 1961 did not believe in the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. 71% of those same people rejected that there was life after death. You and I were raised by these pastors. These are the pastors that were in the churches that we grew up in. Obviously, they didn't all believe that. And obviously, they played those beliefs pretty close to their chest. They revealed them in a poll, but probably not from the pulpit. 54% reject the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. So Christmas is gone. Easter is gone. 98%. A big number, right? 98% rejected that Jesus Christ would return to the earth. In 1961, when I was working on my doctorate, I had a class that was led by two professors who, in a very giddy fashion, proclaimed that they didn't believe any of this either. And I walked out of the program. On their webpage for the school, all of the professors had signed a basic statement of beliefs that included all the things that we believe. And then in the class, they said something different. And I called him on it. I said, really? Why would you sign this statement, teach in a school where you have agreed that you believe all these things, and then teach your students something else? He said, well, beliefs change, since he'd signed the statement. Well, then resign. That's what my thought was. But do you see how we have to purify the temple? If we think of ourselves as a temple, that we have that indwelling Lord in us, then we need to purify ourselves. And that isn't just to get our beliefs in order. It doesn't mean that we have to follow any given line in that regard. It means that we have to somehow be moving on. In my denomination, we talked about moving on to perfection. It's a Wesleyan concept, I will admit that. One of the things that I had to agree to, make a vow about when I was ordained was that I believed that I would be able to become perfect in love in this lifetime. So here's the good thing about that and the bad thing. I thought about that for a long time, and I said, who can be perfect in love? There was only one person perfect in love. It was Christ. How can I say this to be ordained? So I struggled with that for a long time, and I felt like I finally had some revelation about that. If you don't believe a goal can be accomplished, you don't work towards it. Ever thought about that? If you do not believe that a goal can be accomplished, you're not going to try to achieve it. And life, God has set up life to be this constant journey, and He wants us to be moving forward. He wants us to be getting better and better. He wants us to become more like Him, right? More like Christ. Love the way Christ loves. And if we're going to be moving forward, if we're going to be trying to achieve a goal, it's a goal that we have to believe we can achieve. Otherwise, we'll just use the excuse and say, nobody can be perfect. Well, why are you expecting it from me? Or why am I expecting it from myself? Moving on to perfection. Socrates said this, let him that would move the world first move himself. Well, Hezekiah knew opening the temple was not enough. He also wanted to purify it. So we're supposed to do the same thing, to try to purify ourselves, to make ourselves more presentable to God, to have less sin in our lives and more love. In his book with Ken Blanchard, Everyone's Coach, Don Shula tells of losing his temper near an open microphone during a televised game with the Los Angeles Rams. Millions of viewers were surprised and shocked by Shula's explicit profanity. Letters soon arrived from all over the country, voicing the disappointment of many who had respected the coach for his integrity. Shula could have given excuses, but he didn't. Everyone who included a return address received a personal apology from him. He closed each letter by stating, "I value your respect and will do my best to earn it again." Now, there are two ways to gain respect. One is to act nobly. That means that we never make a mistake, right? Easy to respect a person that never makes a mistake. And the other is when you fail to act nobly, you don't make excuses. So one of the ways that we purify ourselves is that we recognize our own failures and we apologize for them. If we make excuses, it's called self-justification. Self-justification. There's only one way that we can be justified. We were justified when Jesus Christ died on the cross. That is what allows us to be in relationship with God. Self-justification doesn't work. We must always be growing. We should be removing all pedestals but God's in our lives. And then we will restore ourselves and we will grow closer to perfection. God bless.